Go further with the American Express Business Gold Card. Earn 3 times membership rewards points on flights and prepaid hotels when you book through AmexTravel.com. Whether your destination is a business conference or a client meeting, your purchases will help you earn more points for future trips. Experience more on your travels with Amex Business Gold. Terms apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
When I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
What is up, Sooner Nation? Welcome back to the podcast. So thankful that you're here to hang with us. Before we get started, please make sure that you're subscribed to us wherever you're finding us. You can follow us on Facebook, 17,000 plus followers already there. You can join them in that community. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Spotify, wherever you get us. Thanks for hanging with us and being with us through these episodes. We're going to talk football. We're going to talk big news in softball with a major injury announcement that you've probably already heard by the time you get to this podcast episode, but we're going to talk about it anyway. But before we get into spring football, which is going to get underway just in a few days, before we get into looking at any roster projections, depth charts, or the 2026 season in general, we need to talk about something that might matter even more for the long-term future of Oklahoma football, because this weekend in Norman, it's not about the roster that you see today. It's about the roster you're going to see 2 or 3 years from now. This weekend is the Future Freaks weekend for Oklahoma football. And if you follow recruiting, or if you care about where Oklahoma stands in this SEC reality that they're still getting used to, this event is a really big deal. It's not just a recruiting weekend. It's not just another junior day. This is one of the most important recruiting showcases that the Sooners host all year long. You're going to have more than 60 elite prospects that are expected to be on campus between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Most of those are going to be from the 2027 class. You've got some rising stars from the 2028 class that are going to be sprinkled in there. And if everything goes according to plan for Brent Venables and his staff, this weekend could push Oklahoma's already loaded number 1 ranked class for the 2027 recruiting cycle even further ahead of the pack. But before we break down the visitor list, before we get into some of the names to watch, let's talk about why this event is called Future Freaks in the first place. You got to start with the momentum that's fueling this entire weekend, and that momentum has a name. Cooper Witten. You know, I'm going to call it the Witten wave. I've already done it in writing at Heartland Sports, but there's no way you missed it. But if you did, the news earlier this week, Oklahoma landed one of the biggest recruiting wins of the 2027 cycle, and that's Cooper Witten, the number 1 linebacker in the country. Yes, he's the son of NFL legend Jason Witten, and now officially he is the centerpiece of Oklahoma's 2027 class. Obviously, that last name jumps out, right? Immediately. Jason Witten, Dallas Cowboys icon. Jason Witten, very soon, I mean, it is a future, but very soon in the future, to be an NFL Hall of Famer. And now, interestingly enough, he's Oklahoma's tight ends coach. But here's the thing that makes this commitment even more interesting. Cooper Witten didn't commit because his dad suddenly works in Norman. And in fact, the story goes deeper than that. Brent Venables offered Cooper Witten back in 2024. So long before the staff change happened, long before the headlines, before the family connection became obvious, Brent Venables identified him and identified him early. And that matters a lot in recruiting because elite prospects, they remember the coaches who believed in them first. And that was Brent Venables. And now you fast forward to this week, Witten pulls the trigger, and suddenly Oklahoma's 2027 class sits at 14 commitments. 14. And we're in March. We're 9 months away from those guys signing. So for context, most programs, they're just beginning in March to build their classes. At this point, they're just putting it together. Oklahoma, they're just stacking blue chip talent right now. And Witten's commitment, it did something even bigger than boost Oklahoma in the rankings. It sent a message. It sent a message to recruits. It sent a message to rival programs. It sent a message to the conference that Oklahoma, they're not easing into the future. They are attacking it. That's why right now they have the number one recruiting class in the country for 2027. And that's multiple recruiting classes. That's not just 24/7, which is the one I look at the most. Most of the recruiting experts have Oklahoma at number one for 2027. And it's not just because of one name. This class already had a serious foundation put in place. You got guys like Cooper Hackett, blue chip offensive tackle. There's Caden Penny, another highly regarded offensive tackle prospect. There's got the explosive running back in Keldred Ben. You've got now the best linebacker in the country with Cooper Witten. And that's the kind of core that recruiting classes, elite recruiting classes, are built around. And when you look at the essential pieces, what you want in your class, quarterback, offensive line, defensive centerpieces, skill players, that's structural recruiting. That it's not random throwing darts against the board, throwing spaghetti against the wall. This is strategic. And now the question becomes, how much bigger can this class get? Because that's what this weekend is designed to answer. That's why I took this long way around to get to the future freaks. All right, we weren't on I-35, we were on I-235. We're going on the detour, right? So you go back to what this weekend is all about, and we'll talk about the event itself, because this is Oklahoma's signature junior day. It's part recruiting visit, it's part evaluation camp, it's part cultural showcase. But the name is not just marketing, it actually tells you what the staff is looking for. Freaks. They're looking for freaks, not just good players, not just productive high school athletes. They're looking for the guys who have those physical outliers. Players with size, with speed, with explosiveness, and athletic ceilings that translate to the style of play that Oklahoma wants to have in the SEC. Because if there's one lesson Brent Venables has taken seriously since the Sooners joined this conference, it's that the SEC demands a different kind of roster. Right? You need length, you need speed, you need violent, explosive athletes on defense, and you need offensive linemen who look like they belong in the NFL. And so this weekend, it's not just about handshakes and photo ops. These players, they're being measured. What is your height? What is your weight? What is your wingspan? Tell me about your explosiveness. Let me see it. Let me see your movement, because the staff wants to know something very specific about these guys. Which of these kids are built to survive and dominate in the SEC? So let's talk about the names that Oklahoma fans should be paying attention to as this weekend unfolds. Like we said earlier, you got more than 60 prospects expected to come into Norman. There are a few targets that sit right at the top of that board, though. And the biggest one, it's got to be at quarterback. Jamison Roberts, he is Oklahoma's top quarterback target for the 2027 class. And if you follow recruiting trends, you know this already. Quarterbacks shape the class. All that props I just gave to Cooper Witten, well, guess what? Jamison Robertson probably holds equal weight here. When you land the quarterback early, the rest of the class often just kind of falls in line, right? Receivers, they're going to want to play with him. Tight ends, they're going to want to play with him. Offensive linemen, they're going to want to block for him. So the staff is expected to give Roberts the full court press this weekend. They're going to show him the offense. They're going to show him the facilities. They're going to show him the vision that they have for his future in Norman, because if Oklahoma can lock down its quarterback for 2027 early, then that number one class could become extremely difficult for other programs to catch up with. And that's the assumption right now. Oklahoma's landed so many prospects so early in this cycle that ultimately they're going to flatline and other programs can catch up. But you get Roberts on board, that's going to make it a little more difficult. Another player to keep an eye on, has drawn a lot of attention, and another defensive prize here is Jaylen Scott. Scott's a 4-star defensive back from Alabama, and his recruitment definitely has been interesting, right? So he's decommitted from Auburn after having already decommitted from Florida State, and now there are multiple, again, I look a lot at 24/7, but there's others out there that we pay attention to here. Multiple insiders believe that Oklahoma is in strong position here. In fact, some predictions have already started rolling in, suggesting that Scott could land with the Sooners maybe even this weekend. And if that happens, you're going to see a continue to see a clear recruiting pattern. Because Brent Venables, he's building something very specific on defense. So you got speed, you got length, you've got aggression. And already in the 2027 class, Oklahoma has 2 corners that are committed. Mikhail McCreary. Yeah. And then if you add Jaylen Scott to that group, now what you're doing is you're building a defensive backfield with serious caliber athletes, the type we were just talking about that you want for this conference. And that's the point. That is exactly the point here. But Future Freaks Weekend, it's not just about quarterbacks. It's not just about defensive backs. Some of the most important visitors might be those big guys that play up front. Look at guys like Tyson Ross, interior offensive lineman from Kansas. One of the staff's priority targets as well. He already has an official visit scheduled for June, but this weekend matters because Oklahoma's battling against Kansas State, and it's a hard battle in his recruitment. And when you're talking about interior offensive linemen in the Midwest, Kansas State, that's one of those teams that's kind of always going to play a factor here. So this trip gives Oklahoma a chance to make a statement here, to show Ross what life looks like inside the program, to connect with future teammates, and maybe, just maybe, get Oklahoma to pull a little bit ahead in the race here. And another offensive lineman, a name that you want to know, Gus Corsair, widely viewed as Oklahoma's top center target for this 2027 class. And centers, to me, they're interesting recruits because they often become the leaders of the offensive line. So that they're the guys that are going to control protections. They're going to anchor the middle. They're the quarterback in the trenches. And so landing the right center, obviously it matters. And one of the biggest advantages Oklahoma has right now, well, their commits are already recruiting them. So, that's something that people outside of recruiting sometimes overlook. Once you build momentum in a class, then the commits become your recruiters. So group chats get started, friendships get established, and suddenly prospects begin to picture themselves in that locker room with each other. And that's the power of the early commitments that Oklahoma has going for them right now. And look, they got plenty of them, 14, we already talked about it. But you know what we like to do here, right? You know how we like to take the Sooner Nation podcast and zoom in or zoom out. Right now, we're going to zoom out for just a minute, because events like Future Freaks Weekend, they didn't always feel this urgent. You go back to when Oklahoma dominated the Big 12. The recruiting formula, it was different. Skill players, offensive firepower, quarterback play. And that would win you championships in that conference. But again, 2 years in, we know the SEC demands something else. You obviously, you got to have offense, but you also have to have defensive depth. You have to have the defensive linemen who can rotate in ways. We saw how effective that was in 2025. You got to have linebackers who can run with tight ends and still be physical enough to stop the run themselves. You need corners who can survive against elite receivers every single weekend. And when you look at Oklahoma's future schedule, you start to understand why Venables is so obsessed with this, because the 2026 schedule includes road trips to places like Michigan, Georgia. Those are two environments where physical football, it's not optional, it is mandatory. And that's why this weekend matters. It's not obviously going to play a factor in September when Oklahoma has to go to Athens, but it'll play a factor in 2029, 2028 when they have to do that. Every recruit on campus this weekend, though, every recruit that comes, they are being evaluated through that lens of what's going to happen in 9 months, what's going to happen in September, and what's going to happen in early October. Can you survive in this conference? Can you dominate in this conference? Or are you just a great high school player? And that matters. That matters. Now, there's another fascinating layer, though, to this weekend, and it's the impact that we're going to see from Oklahoma's new coaching staff. These new faces, obviously Jason Witten, that's a name that stands out immediately. We talked about him earlier, one of the greatest tight ends in NFL history. He's now out there recruiting for Oklahoma. That is a powerful pitch, because when a tight end recruit walks onto campus now, he's being coached by someone who played 17 seasons in the NFL. That's something that's going to resonate. But he's not the only staff member, Witten, that's making waves on the recruiting trail. Look at what I'm going to get used to this name, I promise. Jaylen McEnroe. He continues to be one of the most respected recruiters in the country. And the defensive staff under Brent Venables is relentless when it comes to identifying elite defensive talent. The result, momentum. And recruiting momentum is everything. So commitment watch. Here's the question every recruiting weekend brings. Will anyone commit? It happens more often than you think. Sometimes recruits show up to campus thinking they're just going to take a visit, and then they leave knowing exactly where they want to play their collegiate career. So the combination of atmosphere, relationships, and peer pressure from other commits, it can be really powerful. And Oklahoma, like we said, already holding the number one class. So momentum becomes contagious here. So keep an eye on names like Jaylen Scott. Keep an eye on quarterback Jamison Roberts. And keep an eye on players who might surprise people, because recruiting weekends often produce unexpected fireworks. One last thing to remember here about this weekend. It's not just about the 2027 class. There will also be 2028 prospects on campus, players who are finishing up wrapping up their sophomore year in high school. So these guys are future stars just beginning to rise. And those early relationships, like we talked about with Cooper Witten, those early relationships matter, because in modern recruiting, the timeline has shifted dramatically. Programs are identifying elite players earlier than ever. They're building connections earlier than ever. And the schools that win those early relationships, they often win the recruiting battle. So while the headlines this weekend are going to focus primarily on the 2027 class, the seeds for future classes are also being planted right now. So when fans talk about the future of Oklahoma football, they usually talk about the upcoming season. They talk about the quarterback competition. They talk about defense. They talk about the SEC schedule. But the real future, it's happening this weekend. It's happening in recruiting visits. It's happening in junior day events. And weekends like what's happening right now, Future Freaks, all those prospects walking through campus, experiencing this program, meeting the coaches, meeting other commits, and deciding whether they want to be a part of the next era of Oklahoma football. So right now, Oklahoma holds the number one class for 2027. They just landed the number one linebacker in the class, and this weekend gives them a chance to build even more momentum because championships in this conference, they start long before the season kicks off. They start in recruiting. And if this weekend goes the way Oklahoma hopes, look, the next generation of Sooners might already be taking shape. All right, so we just talked about the future of Oklahoma football, that recruiting momentum, the Future Freaks weekend, next wave of Sooners coming through Norman. But now we have to pivot. I mean, initially when I planned out this podcast episode, it was just going to be one segment, just one. But now you get two because of something that happened. Well, that happened last week, but the news came out and confirmed really what we were most concerned of, because Oklahoma softball, they took a punch. They just took a punch. And this is one of the most dominant programs in the history of college athletics. But man, this was a real one. Patty Gasso confirmed what we've been fearing, that third base, Nelly McEnroe-Marinas, suffered a torn ACL last week when she was injured. Season's over. And for a team that, they entered 2026 with championship expectations, and they've got the lineup that has just been absolutely detonating opposing pitching. This injury, it changes things just a little bit. But here's the question that we're going to explore here in this segment. Does it change everything? Or does it just simply trigger the next chapter of Oklahoma's most defining philosophy, which is this: next person up, next woman up? Because if you followed this program over the last 10 years or so, you already know something. If you've listened to what we say on the podcast, if you read what we write, if you watch the games, dynasties aren't defined by the seasons when everything goes perfectly. They're defined by the seasons when something goes wrong, and something has gone wrong. You go back to last Sunday, to March 1st. Oklahoma's playing Southeastern Louisiana, top of the third inning. A bunt pops up into foul territory near home plate. Two players sprint towards it. Kendall Wells, Nelly McEnroe-Marinas, both charging, both focused. They collide. I mean, Wells makes the catch, but Nelly goes down with the injury. And look, you've watched enough sports. You know that moment, the one where the stadium noise just kind of fades and everyone suddenly realizes something's wrong here, and because she stayed down for a while, and eventually she got up, she walked off the field under her own power, but the evaluation started almost immediately. A few days later, not quite a week later, the diagnosis comes in with a torn ACL, season over. And let's be clear about something here. This isn't just for Oklahoma. This isn't just a starter going down. This is one of the pillars of this roster, because she was hitting .492 when the injury happens. She got 3 home runs on the season, 16 RBI, and she was doing that. I mean, that was in 19 games. So that kind of production, that's elite anywhere. But her impact went beyond the numbers, because after the graduation of Alyssa Burrito last year, third base belonged to McEnroe-Marinas. She had become the lock there on that hot corner, that everyday presence, that's the stabilizer on the left side of the infield. And defensively, her connection with Gabby Garcia at shortstop had become one of the quiet strengths of this team. That left side of the infield was connected. They were fluid and communicating constantly with each other. So that turns tough plays into routine outs, and that's what you saw from this infield. So when you lose a player like that, you're not just losing a bat, you're losing some chemistry, you're losing some leadership, and you're losing experience in big moments. So now she becomes the captain without the title. That's another layer here to this story, because Oklahoma didn't officially name captains for the 2026 season, but inside this program, inside that locker room, everyone knew who the leader was. One of those leaders was Nelly McEnroe-Marinas. Last year, redshirt freshman, she was voted team captain by her teammates. This year, as a redshirt sophomore, she had done nothing to make any of that change. I mean, being named as a redshirt freshman almost never happens. They don't usually become captains, but she had earned it because of her work ethic, because of her consistency, the accountability that she demanded not only of herself, but of her teammates. She was the player staying late for extra ground balls. She was the one pushing teammates in practice. She was the one who didn't just talk about leadership, she worked for it. And there's a deeper layer to her story that I think makes this injury even tougher, because this isn't the first time adversity has interrupted her career. She missed the entire 2024 championship season, which would have been her true freshman year, with a preseason injury. So she watched that whole thing from the sidelines as the Sooners won another national title in 2024. Then she came back in 2025. She earned all SEC honors. She became a cornerstone of this program. And now, just as she was starting to hit her stride again, dang, another injury. And sports can just be cruel like that sometimes. But Oklahoma softball has built its culture around something bigger than individual seasons. And that's where you see this story begin to shift, because there's already been a response, and it was immediate. When Nelly left the game on March 1st, someone had to step in there, right? Someone had to be on third base. And that's where Sid Barker enters the story. She came off the bench. She walked to the batter's box. Her first at bat after Nelly's injury, she launches a 2-run jack. Just like that. And sometimes sports produce moments that just feel almost scripted, right? The teammates stepping up for an injured star, the emotional response, the dugout rallying around them. And after the game, Barker said something that stuck with a lot of people. She said, when tears fall from Nelly's face, it's not good. That hit was for her. And that's the emotional heartbeat of this team. But beyond that moment, there's a bigger question. Is Barker ready to hold down that position long term now? Because inside this program, Sid Barker has a nickname of sports, right? A sort. They refer to her as the Swiss Army knife, because she can play just about anywhere: first base, shortstop, outfield, and now third base. So that versatility matters, especially when you lose a cornerstone player like Nelly. Barker brings something very important to this position at third base. She brings stability. So far this season, she's been perfect defensively. She's got a 1,000 fielding percentage. That's 40 plus chances, 0 errors. And that's the kind of reliability that coaches trust. And if you watch her footwork, it makes sense, because she's trained at shortstop. And shortstop, the footwork there translates extremely well to third base. You got quick reactions, you got strong arm angles, smooth lateral movement, and the things that you need right there at the hot corner. So defensively, Oklahoma may actually maintain more continuity than you would think, with Barker at third and Gabby still staying at shortstop. But offensively, that's where the strategic debate, in my opinion, gets pretty interesting. Because there's another name in this conversation. And if you've been following this team, you watch them, you already know that name. It's Lexi McDaniel. I mean, she is like everybody else in this freshman class, she's a phenom. One of the centerpieces of that number 1 recruiting class. And right now, she's hitting .538. She's got 5 home runs. And she's got an OPS north of 1,500. Those are video game numbers. And she's already made a start at third base once this season. So now Patty Gasso has a fascinating strategic choice. Do you prioritize the defensive stability and veteran mentality of Sydney Barker, or do you unleash the offensive ceiling of Lexi McDaniel? Because McDaniel's bat changes games, but Barker's experience stabilizes the defense. This is the kind of decision that elite coaches navigate all the time. And Gasso, well, she's got options, which is exactly how this roster was built. One of the reasons Oklahoma softball has stayed dominant for so long, it's pretty simple. It's depth. And not just depth on paper, but versatile depth. Players who can move around the field without disrupting the system. You know, another example of this would be Alyssa Parker. She's played first base. She's played shortstop. She's played outfield. She's been the designated player. So that flexibility gives Gasso the freedom to mix and match lineups depending on the matchups. So even though losing Nelly McEnroe-Marinas is significant, the roster here has the pieces to absorb it. And that's the hallmark of championship programs. You're not relying on one star. You're building an ecosystem of talent. And there's another factor here that, again, you can't ignore it, but this Oklahoma lineup, even without Nelly, still one of the most explosive in all of college softball. And they've been hitting home runs, and they've been hitting home runs in bunches. They've been run ruling opponents. They've been putting games away early. So even if the lineup loses one elite at bat, and Nelly's bat is elite, the overall offensive machine is still terrifying for opposing pitchers. This is the team that doesn't just score, they avalanche. And that kind of offensive pressure can hide a lot of lineup adjustments. So, but let's go back, though. Let's go back to McEnroe-Marinas for just a moment. Because even though her season is over in terms of being on the field, her role with this team is not. And Patty Gasso confirmed that Nelly's going to stay with the team. She's going to be a vocal leader in the dugout, and that's crazy important. It matters more than people sometimes realize because this roster still younger than previous championship teams. I mean, there's no Tiare Jennings, there's no Jada Coleman. So the leadership structure is still evolving here. And McEnroe-Marinas, she bridges the gap here. She's lived through the championship culture. She knows the standard. She knows the pressure. And now she becomes a mentor. She's going to help players like Lexi McDaniel, like Sid Barker, navigate the rest of the season. And sometimes leadership happens on the field. Sometimes it happens from the dugout. And both can shape championship runs. So here's the truth about this moment for Oklahoma softball. Every dynasty eventually faces a season where adversity shows up. An injury, a slump, a moment that forces the team to evolve. And this most likely is that moment for the 2026 version of Oklahoma softball. Because replacing a 492 hitter and a defensive anchor, not easy. And I don't think anybody's going to try to describe it as such. But Oklahoma softball has built its culture around resilience. The program expects players to step up. They expect players to grow quickly. They expect players to respond to challenges, and so far they have. Even after the injury, the Sooners continue just a dominant stretch of games. They continue with run rule victories. They continue with explosive offense. The machine just keeps moving. But the real test is going to come later. It's going to come later when they step into conference play. When the pressure for the postseason, seeding for the SEC tournament, seeding for the NCAA tournament, when that begins to rise, and when every defensive play matters, that's when we're going to see exactly how this roster adjusts. So if you zoom out, remember we like to do that. If you zoom out, this moment actually tells you something important about the Oklahoma softball program. This isn't just a team built around stars. It's a system built around standards. Players graduate. Stars move on. Injuries happen. And yet the program continues to produce elite teams year after year. That doesn't happen by accident. That's culture. That's recruiting. That's coaching. And that's leadership. Nelly McEnroe-Marinas won't be on the field for the rest of the season, but her fingerprints are still going to be on this team, in the dugout, in the locker room, in the expectations that she helped set before the season started. And now the next group of Sooners, well, they have a chance to carry that forward because that's how dynasties survive adversity. Someone new has to step forward. Someone new writes the next chapter. And Oklahoma softball has never been short on players ready for that moment. That's going to continue to be a story, to continue to be a theme throughout the rest of the season. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sooner Nation podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back after the weekend to kind of give you some thoughts on the weekend's action with basketball, softball, spring football. So I hope you have an amazing weekend. Until next time, Boomer Sooner.
But I would walk 500